So we're in the middle of Elisha's ministry, and it includes fixing poisonous stew, throwing some meal into it and it's not poisonous anymore. Healing Naaman, the captain of the Aramean army. He's a leper, and he tells him to dip in the Jordan River 7 times, and he's like offended because he's got better rivers back where he's from. But his little maidservant comes to him and says, if he'd asked you to do something great, wouldn't you have done that? And what about the simple thing of just dipping in the river? Why don't you do that? She's basically saying, humble yourself. And so there's a principle in that. See, in the scriptures, it takes humility to just do what the Lord says. And sometimes it may not be the thing that we want him to say. And it may not be the great and glorious thing. He wanted the prophet to come out and wave his hand and say something great over him. Oh, be thou healedest. Or something, and instead he says, go dip in the Jordan River 7 times. He said, that dirty old river, I don't want to go in that dirty old river. And then it's not that big of a river anyway, just a little creek that's muddy, and I got better rivers where I'm from. Forget that. And then he gets kind of instructed by his maidservant, wonderful woman. So, also Elisha makes an iron axe head float in the water. Really kind of wild miracles. And then we get to 2 Kings chapter 6. Okay, in chapter 6 what happens is that the king of the Arameans is upset because everything he does, it seems like the Israelites already know about it. And so he's wondering who's here that's a spy that's giving away everything. And instead, what it says in verse 11, it says, now the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will you tell me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, oh, no, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So he's just saying, they've got quite an intelligence system here. Is that Elisha actually can hear by the word of the Lord, can hear in his spirit what you're saying to your troops. Even if you're in your bedroom, he's telling the king what you're saying in secret. And so it's nobody among us that's betraying you. It's just that they've got a prophet that really hears from the Lord. And in verse 15 it says, now when the attendant of the man of God had risen early and gone out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was encircling the city. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? So here, Elisha and Gehazi are surrounded by these chariots of Arameans. And verse 16, so he answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. It's like, come on, there's 2 of us, and look at all those. But verse 17 says, then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. In verse 18, and when they came down to him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike this people with blindness, I pray. So he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. So here he's surrounded by chariots, but he just prays and says, Lord, open my servant's eyes so he can see. And what happens is there's all this angelic force all around him, and chariots of fire and whatever, and they basically, he just speaks the word, and that whole army is struck with blindness, and he's saved in this situation. Well, because the king of Aram wanted to get rid of him because, man, he's proven to be a formidable adversary here. So his word, I would liken it to, and we see it with Elijah and Elisha, their words are somewhat like we'll read in the book of Revelation from the 2 witnesses, where whatever they say comes to pass, and a lot of times it's actually destructive things against the enemies of God. We don't really see that much in the New Testament anywhere until we get to the book of Revelation, when it comes to the very end of the age at that time, and the 2 witnesses speak with that same kind of authority. Well, the siege had gotten so bad in this area against Israel that they were cut off and they didn't have food. And it gets so bad in chapter 6 that these 2 women come and they're complaining to the king because they had made an agreement, we're going to boil my child the first day and eat him, and then the next time we'll boil your child. And after they ate the first woman's child, the other woman hid her child. And it's like the king is so just set back by what's going on. They've come to this point, they're complaining about it. We're not getting to eat her child today. And what an amazing, horrible siege that's on. So desperate that women actually eating their children. I know this is as gross as it can get and as horrific as it can get, but there's been horrible times on this earth at different times when people are subjected to incredible tension and pressure, and to do things that would seem unimaginable in easier times. Well, Elisha comes with a word from the Lord, and he says in chapter 7, verse 1, then Elisha said, listen to the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time a measure of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria, and this is cheap compared to what it's been. And the royal officer on whose hand the king was leaning answered the man of God and said, behold, if the Lord should make windows in heaven, could this thing be? Then he said, behold, you shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it. So, don't question the word of the Lord that comes through a powerful prophetic voice like that. He's saying, even though you don't see any food today, tomorrow, his food is going to be plentiful. And this guy standing there says, if the windows of heaven were opened, that couldn't happen. He's basically saying, you are crazy. You're crazy. He said, so Elisha says back to him, says, behold, you'll see it, but you'll not eat it. And sure enough, what happens is this incredible story of these 4 lepers that are dying, and they're thinking, why do we just lay here and die? Let's go and see if we can't find some food somewhere. And they head to this other city, and when they're coming, the Lord makes a noise and a sound that the enemy thinks that they're being surrounded by troops or whatever, and they flee and they leave all their food and everything behind. These 4 lepers go into this town and they find all this stuff, and they're just eating and having a good time. And then they think, we can't just do this. We've got to share it with everybody. So they take back all this spoil to their city, and the very word that Elisha said happens. And of course, the guy who said, this couldn't happen even if the windows of heaven are open, like, you're crazy, he does see it and he dies. He doesn't get to eat of it. But this incredible miracle. And so Elisha's ministry it's just filled with these incredible ministries. In verse 14, I'm going to read this in chapter 7. It says, they took their 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent after the army of Arameans, saying, go and see. And they went after them to the Jordan, and behold, all the way was full of clothes and equipment. So this is what happened when the 4 lepers head out. God made a sound like they thought they were being pursued, and so they all leave. And verse 15, and they went after them to the Jordan, and behold, all the way was full of clothes and equipment, which the Arameans had thrown away in their haste. Then the messengers returned and told the king. So the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. Then a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. Now the king appointed the royal officer on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate, but the people trampled on him at the gate, and he died, just as the man of God had said, who spoke when the king came down to him. So they were so excited there that they actually trampled down the guy who was at the gate, saying this could never happen. And so he found out it did happen, but he didn't get to see it happen for very long because he was trampled under there. So I'm going to skip over quite a bit here. We get to chapters 8 through 12, and basically what we're looking at is the history of the kings of Israel and Judah. And this is really the only place where the kings of Israel are mentioned. In the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we only see the kings of Judah. But here, the kings of Israel, and what this is bringing us to, if we look at an overview here, what it's bringing us to is that it's going to bring us to the time when actually Israel is overtaken and captured by Assyria. And so that's where we're leading up to in this. And we get to chapter 13 in 2 Kings, we have the death of Elisha. So another period in the history of Israel is coming to an end. And in verses 20 and 21, it says, Elisha died and they buried him. Now the bands of the Moabites would invade the land in the spring of the year. So Elisha's died, they bury him, and there's a traditional thing of in the spring, we saw that in the life of David. In the spring, when the kings go out to war, well, here the Moabites would invade the land in the spring. Verse 21, and as they were burying a man, behold, they saw a marauding band. These Moabites are coming in, these guys are carrying a guy, and they're going to bury him. It says that they cast the man, instead they decide to leave, to get out of there quickly. They cast the man into the grave of Elisha. When the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood up on his feet. What a surprise for him. So they're carrying this guy out, they're going to bury him, and they see this Moabite band coming, and they're carrying him out, and they just like, let's get out of here, and they throw the guy over into Elisha's grave. His body lands on Elisha's bones, and there's so much power in Elisha's bones still laying in there that the guy is resuscitated. I won't say resurrected because he doesn't have a new body. He's got the old body, just in better shape now. So he jumps up on his feet and runs. So here we've got the end of the ministry of Elisha. It doesn't even end at his death, but it ends a little while later in the spring of the next year, at least, when they throw the bones on Elisha and this guy's raised up again.